Thanks again, Brian, for that. Next, I want to introduce a St. Louis individual from the St. Louis Blues, Alex Rodrigo, who'll be talking about phase 2 of renovations at the Enterprise Center. Alex? No problem.
Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I've actually had the pleasure. There's some familiar faces. Mike, had Mark Taylor, the Olin School of Business, and the OVA program. I've been in town for the last 5 years, and moments like these are really rewarding for me because I really put a tremendous amount of passion. Molly and I have been working together now for about 3 years, 3 years. And every time we get together, it's about just collaborating and really kind of finding this soulful connection. And for me, getting into our presentation today, I'm Alex Rodrigo. I'm the Group Vice President of Sports Entertainment Operations, and I'm also the Arena General Manager for the Enterprise Center. What's that mean? I'm essentially responsible for helping manage over 3 brands, the St. Louis Blues, Stiefel Theater, and the Enterprise Center. All the operational elements, anything from the team needs, from the general manager, the players, the coach, as far as how they interact and integrate with the building, to working with our artists. Last night we opened our building for the first time after being closed for 12 weeks. $42 million later, 62,000 workforce hours. We opened our building last night to Maroon 5 and 12,000 guests and had an amazing time. But you can imagine how many things we touch within that building, and both Brian and Molly did a wonderful job of the slides that they showed earlier about how both marketing, technology, operations, all these things are integrated and touch just about every square inch of that facility. And my role within that is to make sure that those elements are working. And not only working, but we go through the design. If we're going to create change, we look at the future and say, okay, I get where we want to be today. Where are we going tomorrow? Can we future-proof this? Are we setting ourselves up for those types of things? For me, I never saw myself being in this business. And I truly feel extremely fortunate to be one of 31 now in the league of general managers that gets to manage a facility where 40% of what I do is the St. Louis Blues, and the other 60% is non-Blues events. And that's something that sometimes people don't really understand. They said, oh, I thought it was just the Blues. And I said, no, we're a building that opened back in construction in 92, building broke ground in 94. Here we are 24 some odd years later. And like I said, 40% of what we do is the St. Louis Blues, but the other 60% is SEC men's basketball that we just hosted this year. NCAA rounds 1 and 2. You've got NCAA wrestling, Live Nation, AEG, community type, the Walk for Alzheimer's. These buildings are becoming more than just dedicated to 1 or 2 sports. We're using these as town halls to be able to gather and come together, and the business has changed. That was something that Brian was talking about. The evolution of where we're going is changing so fast. And so when I stepped into this business, I spent 8 years in the Air Force. That's my relationship with the Veterans Program. 8 years in the Air Force, Bomb Squad, that's the EOD program. 3 overseas tours from Japan, Korea, and Central South America. So what's a guy in the Bomb Squad doing now today in sports and entertainment? Everything that I've done in my life has centered around operations. How do things work? How do we bring people together, concepts and ideas? And I truly, truly thrive in that environment. It's how I have a seat at just about every meeting to talk about all these wonderful ideas, taking best practices that are going around the world, and then come together with the team and say, how do we bring that into our facility? When I walked into the what was formerly the Scott Trade Center, and I walked the facility 665,000 square feet later, I made the comment, and it was actually quoted on the radio, or captured on radio broadcast. I said, the 80s called, and they'd like their stuff back. We had no Wi-Fi. We had SD signal in the building, an SD broadcast control room, and this is 3 years ago. I've been with the organization now 4. I've been here 5. I've opened the Bellagio back in 98, first $2 billion project in Las Vegas. Went on to co-found a division for Colliers International for the mixed-use hotel gaming industry, understanding that that was the direction we were going as projects come together, and all of a sudden you have this anchor, and within that you create this mixed-use complex, and with the way people engage and interact and exchange experiences. I got a phone call from a buddy of mine that I opened the Bellagio with in 98 and said, hey, I'm thinking of putting the band back together. And I said, what do you got? He says, working for Cordish now, and I have Ballpark Village opening in partnership with the St. Louis Cardinals in St. Louis. And I said, okay, what are you looking for? Someone with a background like yours that has touched security, public safety, food and beverage, hospitality, and the list goes on. And the next meeting I had was with David Cordish, Blake, and Reed, and I was opening up Ballpark Village in partnership with the St. Louis Cardinals. Had an office at Busch Stadium. Had never been in sports before, as far as from a professional standpoint. Played a little bit of rugby when I was in the Air Force, but that was about it. And I found myself there watching, the Cardinals take practice. And now as part of this evolution in sports, where you're creating these, I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, and Hollywood. No claim to fame. But I look at the business and the work that I manage as an executive producer on a studio lot. And our studio lot are 3 brands: the Blues, Enterprise Center, and Stiefel Theater. And this lot is anchored here in St. Louis, and I look at the local community and I bring all these elements in and I say, okay, on this studio lot we have all these different sets, whether it's the St. Louis Blues or a Broadway show next door, and my job is to manage the studio lot in partnership with my colleagues who are out there making promises, building obligations around our sponsorship programs, along with our tour partners, along with the NHL, working on Winter Classic, which may not be happening in your facility, but it's happening within the region. So we actually work outside those walls when we're out there auditioning to bring new content or business into the local region or into our city. And that's really what this Phase 2 renovation was all about. The Phase 1 is all about. The Phase 3 is remaining competitive. And so before we get into what we changed, I'm going to play a little video about why we changed things, and I think that's really going to drive home. The gentleman that you'll see on this video is a Hall of Famer. His name is Brett Hull. I think folks have heard me say this before. When I first started with the organization, I was given Brett Hull's old office. I have zero hockey background. Tom Stillman and Chris Zimmerman, when I was hired, knew that and actually encouraged that. So I was bringing a different perspective into the organization. With a zero hockey background, taking over Brett Hull's office, 6'2", 250-pound Hispanic male, zero clue about hockey, and I'm sitting in his office, and I've seen people disappointed to see me, but when Bobby Plager and Chris Pronger and Al McGinnis and all these Hall of Famers and other terrific athletes are stopping by and they see me sitting in Brett's office, they're kind of like, who are you? And I went from a zero hockey background to really developing some deep, meaningful relationships with former players. Along the way, like last night, meeting Adam Levine and Maroon 5 in the locker room and welcoming them not only to St. Louis, but to our building, and thanking them for trusting us and making a stop here in St. Louis. We are constantly auditioning and asking the world to stop in St. Louis, come through our building. If it's not here, it's at Busch Stadium. If it's not there, at the Dome, wherever it may land. But we're out there, we're being seen and heard. And what you'll see here in this video is the why there's a need to stay competitive, why we made these changes, and more importantly, you have 3 generations of people coming through your gates, And I take a tremendous amount of pride and responsibility comes with that to make sure that not only your food, but your parking experience, your ticketing experience, your suite experience, your seat experience, the technology, your phone's working, you can make a phone call, you can connect, you can tweet, you can do all the other things that you want to do to stay, because we are competing with the home experience. And so how do you make these buildings more dynamic? But before you can create all of that change or even embark on that, because even one small change in your building is a domino effect. It's going to change a lot of things throughout this facility. It affects a lot of your business partners and your colleagues. And part of my job is being an active listener and then taking that feedback and then saying, these are the promises, here's the goal, here's the objective, now can we do it? And then once you build it, you have to turn around now and operate it and make sure that it's successful and then manage accordingly. But it's truly an experience. And you'll see here, I think this is what really drives that message home. Please.
For over 8 decades, 14th and Clark has been the epicenter of sports and entertainment in our city. A place for our community, our city, and our region to come together. A place to laugh, a place to compete, a place to dance, to cheer, and to celebrate. And for almost a quarter century, 14th and Clark has been the home of the St. Louis Blues. Born from civic pride, The team has been beloved by its fans and a pillar of the community for over 50 years. The Blues created an instant energy and a love affair with the city the moment they arrived. And that energy carries forward to this day. The Blues came to 14th and Clark from their former home on Oakland Avenue. Playing in the new Kiel Center, the building brought a new level of energy and business development to the downtown area. Once again, 14th and Clark became the home for great professional, collegiate, and amateur sports. Far more than a sports facility, the arena served as a magnet for the best concerts, entertainment, and family shows touring the world. 14th and Clark has brought the world to St. Louis, hosting NCAA wrestling and basketball, championship figure skating, and the Frozen Four national championships. Within its walls, fans have witnessed some of the best characters in hockey history, Hall of Fame players, and legends of the game. It has hosted concerts and events that appeal to people from all backgrounds and cultures. And when the Pope came to St. Louis, this is where we hosted him. It has remained the unofficial town hall of St. Louis, and it has brought millions of people to our downtown. And now, with that same sense of community pride and dedication, it is time for a new generation of commitment to St. Louis. It is time for a renewed sense of commitment to showcasing our city, our state, and our region. By strengthening our relationships and partnering with those that want to shape a brighter future, we believe the time is now to move St. Louis forward. After 23 years and 35 million guests, it is time to begin again. Our goal is to renew and to create a new fan-friendly arena, one with updated infrastructure, improved fan amenities, and technology that responds to the needs of today's guests. As we revitalize our regional entertainment hub, we will showcase more St. Louis character in our food, beverage, and hospitality offerings. We will upgrade our amenities in order to bring more energy and excitement to our game and event presentation. We will offer new seating options. We will create new gathering spaces, better building accessibility, and fan experience that will continue to attract the nation's and the world's greatest events. We will remind our community of the pride, dedication, and love that they have for St. Louis. We will showcase who we are and what we can be. And we will continue to bring people to our city so they can laugh, compete, dance, cheer, and celebrate. Right here at the Town Hall of St. Louis. Right here at 14th and Clark.
So, I talk about inspiring the group that you work with. When we were building this and coming up with the history of what the building has represented or represents, we're all moved by it. And sometimes I can't help but get a little emotional because so many people play such an important role in what's happening in our building. And I get it, sports and entertainment. I come from a background where I was, dealing with some very critical things, around the world. And that's why I consider myself extremely fortunate to be in this business. But when we started looking at the facility and started making these changes, we used a lot of the inspiration in that video to make this change and then embark on this journey. I encourage each and every one of you in whatever facet of this business and how you touch this element. It's exciting to work in an industry centered around sports and entertainment in consideration to everything that's going on in the world. So let's talk about what we changed. Last year, $34 million over 12 weeks. This year, $42 million over 12 weeks. We still have a business to run. I have an obligation to keep that going, generate revenue, remain competitive. We started making these changes. Last summer, it was about changing the center hung and concession stands, building a new locker room and working with the team and all the different elements and technology that play an important part because the business has changed. When you think about a team in their locker room, we look at lighting spectrums. We talk about the analytics and the biometrics that are now going into the way professional athletes, men and women, demand and need these days, especially whether it's coming up through youth hockey or youth sports into the professional environment. It's happening at a really fast pace. And so by the time you get here we are 24 years later at the Scott Trade Center, now the Enterprise Center, realizing we have a lot of ground to make up. We have a budget, we have constraints. You look at all the things that you want to do, and then you look at all the things that you really can do, and then prioritize those things and say, what's important? You know, whether it's the business analytics, the sports analytics side of it, the sponsorship, the revenue, the marketing, the public safety aspects, all those things play an important part in the way you go about your building. So we made a lot of changes last year. This year in the phase 2 of a renovation, we really focused on what was going to be about gathering spaces. We looked at the facility when we started on this journey, and I'm just kind of zipping through some of these things, from terrace seating and beer gardens to the mezzanine level. We looked at the building in 3 areas. We looked at infrastructure. You have an outdated facility that needs a lot of help. We also looked at technology, because it's such a big part of the business today. It touches just about everything that we do. And then we looked at the way fan engagement. We looked at the way people are interacting, whether it's a business looking at buying a suite and saying 16 tickets is too much for us to manage. So we start looking at theater box concepts and the way that you can scale accordingly and you get more buy-in, and the way that people are congregating around the concourse. We talked about these mixed-use developments and realizing, hey, there aren't people in their seats, but they're in the building, they're engaging, they're interacting. All this information is available on the website. I encourage you to come down to the building. I know we're a little pressed on time, so I just wanted to make sure that I capture everything. I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts in closing, and it's really about having an intent and a purpose, and whatever it is that you do, you play an important part in the organization. I literally get to sit in a lot of these meetings and see all these different faces from all the different departments and the needs and the responsibilities. Last night when we opened our doors, it was a race to the finish line. Many of you have seen me on TV, and I said it's like a home improvement show, HGTV. It's all going to get done in the last commercial break, and I wouldn't lean against that wall because it's probably still fresh paint, but we made it. And we're excited about the ability to remain competitive. We put on a heck of a show for the SEC this year. We made an impression. I go back, Mike and I were just talking about this earlier, and I think myself and some of our friends here, being born and raised in Hollywood, California, people, it's the mecca of acting, right? Well, one thing I took away in my life was that if you're not being seen or heard, you're not being seen or heard. Get up, audition, try, make some mistakes. I had the pleasure of having a few interns in our building that were working for our president CEO, who's my boss, and a young man by the name of Ryan. Didn't know where he was coming from, and I had no idea where he was going. But he was in front of us, he was here, and I wanted to make him a part of the family, and we developed a really nice relationship. The point is that he was being seen, he was being heard, he was auditioning, he was in the mix. And as in Hollywood, you may not get that first role that you auditioned for. You may have made a mistake, or maybe you just delivered a really bad performance for that role. But 2-3 years later, 2-3 movies later, 2-3 buildings later, 2-3 teams later, if you left something memorable there, that group will look back and say, hey, you remember that Ryan kid or that Mike Bynum from a couple years ago? This is a perfect opportunity for that young man or that young woman to join our organization. I encourage you, be seen, be heard. Thank you so much for giving me that time to be seen and heard. I'll be available afterwards with a few other folks here in the room to answer any questions. So have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.